to discuss. I'm joined now on the line by our foreign affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, as I said, Denmark already has some of the toughest stances on migrations in the EU. Now it's just going to get tougher.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the latest in a series of moves that have been really just targeting migrants. It's been part of a broader anti-immigrant movement in Denmark. You know, when you talk about these days a fortress Europe, a Europe closing its hatches, battering down, not letting outsiders in, Denmark, perversely, sort of embodies that image the best, more than almost any other European country. We've already seen the government deliberately sort of set as its target a zero refugee target, essentially meaning exactly that, what it sounds like. It doesn't want any asylum seekers or refugees in Denmark. At the same time, there's been a whole debate about ghettos in Denmark, especially in the bigger cities, the capital, Copenhagen, so on and so forth. And this has been talk about targeting or trying to reduce social housing in Denmark for so-called non-Western populations. Let me translate non-Western for you. It means non-white, and it largely means non-European. So you've already had this very sharp rhetoric, which has been perceived in many quarters among the small immigrant population there as being very discriminatory. The UN Human Rights Commissioner has called these policies and the latest move as well a frightening race to the bottom, and says that it really just flies right in the face of all the norms about international asylum cooperation. And like you said, what this move essentially does is it would make it virtually impossible for asylum seekers to be able to not just get into Denmark, but to settle and stay there if their applications are approved. They would now be sent to a third country, which is euphemistically called a host country, put in an asylum detention there while their applications are being processed. And then, Nadia, if on the slight chance those applications are actually approved, what happens then? Do they get to go and set up their new dreams for life in Denmark? No. They would stay in that host, that third country, and feel lucky not to have been deported. That's what's being talked about. The countries that are being in talks with Denmark, reportedly, Egypt, Eritrea, Ethiopia, countries that human rights groups say are not exactly shining exemplars of their own human rights record, which opens up questions of access to asylum and the right to protection for asylum seekers. So there's a Pandora's box here that this move opens up, but it is in line with a whole series of policies that we've seen in Denmark getting tougher and cracking down on the non-white, non-European population of the country.
And Doug, this is being pushed through by the Social Democratic Prime Minister of Denmark. Why are these policies coming from the centre-left?
Because they are taking the policies straight from the playbook of a far-right party, the Danish Folkeparti, which is the Danish People's Party. Now, that party won big in elections 6 years ago, back in 2015. And the now Social Democratic Prime Minister took her lesson from that. She was defeated back then. And she said, never again, basically, to herself, am I going to have a strategy that doesn't somehow take into account the migrant situation. So she did what a lot of politicians, mainstream politicians in Europe, have been doing, taking hard right, anti-immigrant, migrant, anti-migrant policies and making them the norm. They're now part of the mainstream political discourse. So we have seen Mette Frederiksen, the current prime minister, at the head of a center-left social democratic government, basically co-opting the agenda of a far-right party on immigrants in order to perhaps make her party's positions more palatable to society at large. Denmark being, once again, a small country, fewer than 6 million, not used to mass migration, very white, predominantly white, very used to a nice lifestyle with high taxes but great social benefits. So there's a lot of questions about identity going forward, and these far-right groups are playing into the identity politics, the concerns that mass migration, if it were to happen, could have on identity politics, so on and so forth. The main thing to take away is this type of policy now, Nadia, is the norm. It is mainstream in European political discourse.
All right, really interesting stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Douglas Herbert, talking to us there.